Hello, my name is Charlie, and this will be an art lesson. Today we're going to talk about the special relationship between paper and pencil. This lesson will be about 15 minutes long. Let's get started. This is my drawing surface. It's flat and there's good light. Today I will be using printer paper or typing paper, a common paper that is found in many households. I'll be using 5 pieces, which creates a nice thick pad to draw on. The first character in this demonstration is the pencil. There's drawing pencils and writing pencils and different kinds. This is a drawing pencil that I use for camera work because it's darker. Your pencil might look more like this. This is a writing pencil you might see at school. It has a tip or a lead that is in a wood shaft or body, and there's a ferrule at the end holding an eraser. This is a drawing of a pencil tip, close up. This end is the lead, and it's made of graphite, which is wiped onto the paper when you draw, and it leaves dark lines. You might think that this paper is very smooth with no bumps, like this. But if you were to look at it very closely, maybe even under a microscope, you would see that it has ridges, little bumps, mountains and valleys, like this. So when I use my pencil to make a mark on this paper, the pencil doesn't go into these microscopic valleys, but just marks the tops of these mountains. And so when I draw lightly over paper, it doesn't make a black mark as dark as the graphite, because you can see the paper through the graphite marks, and it looks like a gray tone. Now if I were to take a pencil again and draw on the surface of this paper, the pencil marks would go a little further down into the valleys, and my area would get darker. So going over the same area more with the same pressure makes it darker and darker. Now if I wanted a super dark space on my drawing, I could press very hard with the tip of this pencil on the surface of the paper, and it is strong enough to actually smush all these valleys and mountains, and it makes a very dark mark with very thick graphite on the paper. An interesting quality is that it becomes very smooth and shiny, and if you were to try this at home, you might notice that. For this next demonstration, I got a fresh piece of paper, but the tip of my pencil is dull after all that drawing. I'm going to use a pencil sharpener. I'm gently pushing it in, and the blade is taking the wood away and shaping the lead into a sharp point. That takes some practice, but now I have a sharp pencil tip. I'm going to hold the pencil straight up and down and make a heavy black line. I'm pressing almost as hard as I can without breaking the tip to draw these lines. When we draw heavy, dark lines in the paper, an interesting thing happens. I'm going to draw another close-up view of paper with the mountains and ridges. This line is the top surface of the paper. When I press straight down on this paper and draw, I'm actually making a deep valley. And at the bottom of the valley is the graphite. Oh, I forgot to introduce my eraser. Now we have a valley in the surface with graphite at the bottom of it. And when I try to erase it, my eraser doesn't really go down into that valley when I rub it on the surface of the paper. So these heavy black lines that I drew are not going to go away when I try to erase them. But if I draw with light lines, just barely going across the surface of the paper, you'll notice my pencil is at a steep angle. Then my graphite is just going across the top of the surface of the paper to make the lines. So if I make a mistake and I want to erase it, I'm able to do so completely, and it's gone. Another interesting thing has happened with this valley with the graphite at the bottom. I pushed down so hard with my lead that I made an impression on the next page. I hope that you get a chance to try this at home. For this next step, I'm going to use a pencil that I've freshly sharpened, and I'm going to hold it almost the same angle as the paper, nice and flat, like a rake. And I'm just making a light gray mark. Here, I'm really just cleaning up the tip because I just sharpened it. Watch what happens when I shade over those impressions. If you look closely, you might notice that there's white lines of the drawing I made earlier. I'm going to go over it again and make it darker. Hopefully it'll show up a little better. So let's take a moment to think about what happened. If this is the mountains and valleys of a piece of paper, my other drawing pressed a valley down into this paper. But all the graphite was on my other drawing, and just the valley remained. So when I lightly shaded over my paper, the pencil skipped right over that valley, leaving a white space underneath. And those are the white lines that make up this drawing. Keeping that relationship between paper and pencil in mind, I'm going to make a drawing. And I'm going to start with my pencil at a steep angle, drawing very lightly across the surface of the paper so that I'm not damaging it or making any pits or valleys. I'm lightly sketching the shape of my drawing in, and as I become more sure about how it's going to look, my pencil marks become darker and darker. And I'm using my eraser to remove pencil marks I don't want. Of course, I'm drawing a pencil. The pencil needs to be nice and straight, and now that I have the general shape, I'm going to start putting in some of the finer details. And because it's part of a lesson, I'm going to label the different parts of my pencil. This is called the eraser. It is for removing graphite from paper in very small bits. I prefer a big eraser. The metal piece that goes around it is called the ferrule. The ferrule is crimped or pinched on to the body of the pencil. The body sometimes has paint on it to protect the wood. This part, you can see the wood. It's a cylinder of wood, and in the very center is the lead, which hopefully makes a nice point for drawing. After I have a line drawing, I like to go through and add some shading. And I usually put a little darker edge on the underside of what I'm trying to draw. And this helps people imagine that it might be three-dimensional. Although, of course, it's not. It's just graphite on paper. For this drawing, since we're making a drawing about drawing, I'm going to draw a piece of paper underneath my pencil, and I'm going to give it a cast shadow. A cast shadow is the kind of shadow that falls on a surface when the subject is blocking the light. And this shadow, again, helps people get the idea that this might be a three-dimensional pencil. I can even give a cast shadow to the piece of paper. Sometimes when I'm drawing, I like to look at stuff and try to copy the shapes I see onto my paper. So I've decided that my paper on my paper drawing needs to have some marks on it, like the person has already warmed up their drawing muscles. So I'm going to scribble and scratch straight lines and curly lines and try to fill up this space as if this person who was using this pencil just had a drawing lesson. So one of the things you can do at home, if you'd like to try this, is get a piece of printer paper, or 5, a nice flat work surface with good light, and see if you can fill up a piece of paper with all the different kinds of marks that graphite can do. You can try pressing really hard and making an impression in the paper underneath. I think that's really interesting. Or just scribble and scratch and get used to using your pencil, because we'll have more drawing lessons in the future. Well, that's all I got for you today. I hope you get a chance to try some of these things at home. Well, thank you for being part of my lesson. I have to go out and run some errands, so I will see you next week when we'll have another art lesson and we will learn to draw a Stegosaurus, the very best dinosaur. Well, it's been a pleasure and a privilege, and I enjoyed it to the utmost.